guy behind the wheel of that Boulder Street Lightning? That's me, Bullet Bill Bowers. My folks and I just moved to this new city, and it sure seemed to me like I picked out a town full of sleepwalkers. That included the fellas and girls my own age, too. I never saw such a collection of sleepy Joes, and they drove like rich old ladies in old-time electric heaps. Looked like I was gonna have to educate the high school on the subject of hot rods, how to take a jalopy and really make it move. Why, in the burg I came from, I had the juiciest bug of any rodder in the Goose Greasers. That was our street racing club. And I had the biggest collection of traffic citations, too. All us greasers drove the cops crazy, and I could have started a private mental sanitarium for those I'd worked over. I hadn't met Walt Perry and his sister Janet yet. Walt was president of the Knights, the City Auto Sport Club. His sister was secretary. I guess my roadster impressed him. Yeah, I really had a job putting some life into this town. Why these jokers even walk slow? I went into my act at lunchtime, trying to bring the word to a bunch of prime squares. But believe me, that was the coldest audience anybody ever played to. I got nothing, just nothing. I didn't get it at all. Were these guys abnormal or something? Or had I joined up with a bunch of zombies? It was gonna be tough, but I'd have to bear it. I was stuck with him. This city was a slow burg. It was kind of lonesome that first day, and after school. But I knew a way to get him to notice me. It had always worked before, where I came from. Yeah, they knew I was around now, all right. You should have seen them scatter. I got a lot of attention. Some of it not quite what I had in mind. Officer Jim Daniels came to school to give his regular safety talk. He took off after me. First he told me I was driving like a wild man. I took that as a compliment. And then he asked if I was a member of the Knights. So I said no, I was a goose greaser and wanted to show him my card. But all he wanted to see was my driver's license. So I was getting my first ticket in this city. Didn't impress me much. Like I say, I held a goose greaser record. But this was a different kind of a ticket. Well, I had to go to court, all right, but that wasn't new. But this court was held right in the school. And the judge and jury and the whole court were girls and fellas like myself. How about that? I didn't dig it at all. Officer Daniels was there. He was the police department advisor. The judge really socked it to me. No, I didn't have to go to jail or pay another fine. I was sentenced to a special traffic school for unsafe and reckless drivers. I'd heard about these school courts all over the country, how they'd help cut down teenage accidents, but I'd never dreamed I'd end up in one. I had to find out from somebody just what was the matter with this town. Why were they so far behind the times? I guess Officer Daniels had figured out what I was thinking. He suggested that Walt and Janet Perry explain a few things about their city and hot rodding the Knights way. They gave it to me, both barrels. They weren't behind the times, I was. How about that? Me behind the times. So, I began learning about real hot rodding. The kind that developed after World War II. That's when thousands of high school and college kids and servicemen were bitten by the speed bug. They began cutting down and souping up stock cars and racing them in the public streets. It didn't take long to give drivers under 25 a bad name. Why? Maybe because teenage accidents were killing or maiming somebody once every 2 minutes, causing more damage than all fires and twice as many casualties as we had in the whole Korean War. The police cracked down too and collected driver's licenses wholesale. This scene was played up in a national picture magazine. But like Walt explained, figures don't mean much, just reading them. You're a lot more impressed by what happens to you personally. Tom Hanks was Walt's best friend, and his hero, actually. Tom had been in the Air Force as a fighter pilot. Now he was going to college. Tom had built up just about the slickest cut-down custom conversion in existence. You see, Tom had a big advantage. His father, George Hanks, had a big auto repair business, and besides that, he manufactured and sold speed parts. Mr. Hanks had to admit that his son had the hottest motor in town. But Tom shouldn't have spent all his time on the motor. There are other parts to a car, too. Like those little gimmicks in the wheels, the brakes. Tom was breezing down the road, and he was catching up to the 1105, a pretty fast freight. Then he thought of a good test for his engine. If he could beat the fast freight to the crossing, he'd know his engine was perfect. Then the engine sputtered, missed, slowed down just a little. Tom wouldn't beat the train. He'd have to use his brakes. But he didn't have any, and it was too late to turn off. It would have been easy to find that leak in the brake line, but Tom had spent all his time on the motor. A whole lot more impressive than figures. After the accident, Mr. Hanks told Officer Jim Daniels he wanted to do something, anything, to keep other boys from getting killed the way his son was. Well, Officer Daniels was ready. He'd been reading about a new kind of hot rod club, with stiff, safe driving tests, and which only admitted members who hadn't had a ticket for 6 months. They raced their cars, but only on special safe drag strips after complete safety inspections. So that was how the Knights Hot Rod Club was organized. Mr. Hanks was its sponsor, and Jim Daniels agreed to be police department advisor. Mr. Hanks turned over a garage to the club and gave them enough tools and equipment for a start. Every hot rodder in town wanted to join, but the safe driving test and no ticket requirement kept out quite a few at the start. While they were waiting for a drag strip, the Knights began getting their cars in shape to qualify. And to many proud owners' surprise, a lot of the cars failed the safety inspection. Those that failed were disqualified for racing, so the owners worked them over night and day until they did pass. The inspection teams were getting good, so Officer Daniels decided to play a joke on them, see just how good they were. He brought over a prowl car that was ready for overhaul. The mechanic had found 5 things wrong. Now Jim wondered whether the Knights could find them. All the inspection teams joined in, teaming up on Jim's car. And they found the faults all right. And then more faults. And more faults. And more faults, a dozen more than the contract mechanic had located. When Jim got that report, he realized he'd been driving a death trap. He was lucky to have gotten to the garage alive. Yeah, the Knights had made a believer out of Jim. Meantime, Mr. Hanks was collaring all his business friends and getting them to help sponsor a drag strip and safety program. He was a real salesman. Almost before they knew it, they were signed up. Knights sponsors. Mr. Hanks and Jim Daniels went looking for a site to develop a good, safe drag strip. They found an old airfield that looked like it would fill the bill. It didn't take long to get the strip ready, and when the Knights staged their grand opening and their first-time trials and drag races, they were really on their way. The club began to impress people, the whole city, in fact. The Knights were proud of their club and were out to build a new reputation for hot rodders, for courtesy and safe driving. More and more motorists in distress received club courtesy cards. They led a successful campaign for driver education and auto shop training in high school, and right away, this began paying off, just as it has everywhere. In a survey in one state, 800 untrained drivers had 5 times as many accidents as 800 who had received training in school. At the same time, the untrained drivers got 7 times as many traffic tickets. Believe it or not, teenage drivers who are trained in school courses have a lot fewer accidents and get a whole lot less tickets than adult drivers. The driving teachers say that the students really go for it. Driving class is one they never miss. And why would they? Every now and then there are guest speakers, like the famous Ralph De Palma, who's considered the greatest racing driver in the past 50 years. He always tells the girls and fellas that nobody appreciates and respects careful driving more than a professional racer. Well, sure, all that safety stuff was fine, I told him. Sounded good. But speed was my meat. A good fast mill and a tire-burning takeoff. The Knights go for speed too, Walt said. And then he asked if I'd like to bring my job out to the drag strip Sunday and try it out against some of their wagons. This was what I'd been waiting for. Walt had himself a deal. But I never got near the strip. They wouldn't let me. They checked my car over and said it wasn't safe. It took me a month working after school and on weekends just to get ready to pass the safety test. So I was finally going to get my chance. While we were waiting for them to qualify my car, Walt showed me around, explaining how a properly run drag strip operates. There are classifications for all kinds of hot rods, but the main one is the ratio of weight to piston displacement. This determines the basic engine class. After a car is weighed and classified, it gets a complete safety inspection. I knew from experience how tough this is. Those inspectors don't miss a thing. That's why drag strips have run for years without a serious accident. When it's been classified and inspected for safety, a car is ready to run. It gets an official number. But drivers have to be in good standing too. If they're not of age, their parents have to okay them. Some of them show up a little too early. While the other cars are getting oil changes, he just gets changes, period. One of the cars, named the Bean Bandit, held a strip record from a standing start to 142 miles an hour in a quarter of a mile. You'd be surprised at the number of girls who enter these drags. Not just driving either. They know what's under the hood because they put it there themselves. Yeah, the drag strip was like a circus or a miniature Indianapolis. Hundreds of people were there from town to watch. A real big professional deal. Believe it or not, from a standing start, some of these draggers would beat a jet plane down that quarter-mile stretch. There were just about as many ideas in rebuilt bodies and chassis as there were in high-efficiency motors. It may be a man's world, but you'd never know it on that drag strip. The girls didn't ask any special deal either. They went right out and ran against the men. Did fine, too. They won their share of places. George Hanks and Jim Daniels had a right to be proud. And they were. The nights in their drag strip were things the whole city could take pride in. No wonder they came out by the hundreds or even thousands to watch every drag meet. Then Walt pointed out a man at the refreshment counter. His name was Phillips, a top designing engineer from Detroit. Did you know that a whole lot of the engine ideas in new cars were first tested and proved on drag strips and dry lakes? Things like dual exhaust, dual carburetors, and high compression heads. Phillips was there to watch for applications his company could use. You know, by the time they called my number, I'd become so interested I almost forgot what I was there for. This was my chance to show them. I didn't have any doubt about breaking the record. The only question I had was, by how much? But either that clock was broken or somebody was being funny, I thought. They had me clocked at a little over 70, just half the speed of the top car. I complained to Walt just who the comic was. Walt said nobody, the time was right. But if I wanted to try a drag race, I sure did. Now I could really show them. Right on the drag strip with no phony clocks. Out of my way, starter. Yeah, I showed them all right. I had the coldest hot rod on the strip. I was left so far back I could have been driving Jack Benny's Maxwell. Obviously, I had a lot to learn from these squares. Well, there was still the reliability run. You'd think by now I'd have had better sense than to go through with it, but I didn't. And I learned another lesson. I couldn't even finish. My radiator boiled over and I ran out of gas. And I was gonna teach them about hot rods. When that 1925 Star went by me, that did it. Right then, I made up my mind. If it was the last thing I ever did, I had to be one of the knights. So I got the list of membership requirements from Walt and his sister. She was the club secretary. And guess the first thing I had to do? I had to learn to drive. Imagine that after all the miles I'd driven. But after a couple of sessions in the dual-control car, I found out there was a whole lot more to good, safe driving than knowing how to turn the wheel or which pedal is the gas. Actually, there was more I didn't know about driving than I did know. But that was just the first requirement. Next thing on the list was to go 6 months without a citation, or even a warning. That was really tough at first, but I made it. Believe me, I was never so glad of anything in my life as I was to get hold of that little Knight's membership card. But I knew one thing. I was a whole lot better and a safer driver than I was before I started working for it. Janet asked me to come outside. She said the Knights were holding a clinic and wanted me to join them. And that's when I found out how little I actually did know about souping up an engine. The Knights were holding a clinic, all right, on my car. I thought I'd revved up my motor pretty well. But now I learned about porting and relieving the block, cylinder bore, racing flywheels, custom camshafts, exhaust headers, dual exhaust, tolerances, new ignition, high compression heads, hemispherical combustion chambers, dual carbs, dual point distributors, dual intake. Well, I needed a mechanic's dictionary to even follow what they were talking about. All those parts and the tools were gonna cost money, so I got a job after school and Saturdays to pay for them. You know, some guys spend thousands of dollars on a good hot rod, plus thousands of hours of work. They won't even drive him in traffic. Some careless driver might smash into him and ruin a car that costs more than a Cadillac. While I was getting the money together, I read every book on mechanics I could get. I got a few ideas, too, about carburetors mostly. I decided to rebuild my car for the reliability run instead of the drag race. This would give me a better chance to try my carburetor ideas. And you know something? My ideas paid off, too. It took me a few months, but I finally won a 3rd place for reliability. But I got a real surprise when they started giving out the trophies. How? Well, the city merchants had awarded a trip to the Memorial Day race at Indianapolis to the boy the club voted most deserving. And guess who the Knights elected? Me, Bill Bowers, the ex-ticket champ. How about that? Then Mr. Phillips, you know, the Detroit engineer, came over and wanted to look at my carburetor. He asked if I'd be interested in a scholarship for their factory school to study mechanical engineering. They've given a lot of scholarships to fellas in hot rod clubs, and a lot of them became top mechanics and designers. Of course, I said yes. So I got the biggest kick of my life, seeing the 500-mile race. They'd arranged for Ralph De Palma to show me around, too. He introduced me to racing stars like Manny Ayula and Eb Jenkins. And Mr. De Palma and Harry Hartz talked over old times. We looked over all the cars, too. Bob Estes and driver Don Freeland were wheeling their special out for a warm-up run. This is the toughest race of all, for cars and drivers. A speed trial and reliability run all at once. What a kick, meeting famous guys like Duke Neyland and Roger Ward. And they told me they all considered Ralph De Palma the greatest driver in Indianapolis history. And Wilbur Shaw, the president of the Indianapolis Speedway, agreed with him. He won the race 3 times himself. You think the racers are fast, you should watch the pit crews work. Why, they can change a tire faster than a blowout can go flat. A driver just couldn't win the race without a good pit crew to work his car over during the pit stops. Then, on the morning of Memorial Day, the big race started. I think there were about 200,000 people watching. The biggest crowd for any sports event in the country. And get this, out of the 33 cars, 9 of them were driven by ex-hot rodders, members of clubs like the Knights. The winner drove the 500 miles in less than 4 hours. That means an average of better than 125. Yeah, like I said, it was the biggest kick I ever had. Hard to realize I was actually sitting there, watching the biggest race in the world. Yeah, it's tough to believe now that that jerk in the slop-up was me, just a few months back, before I became a Knight. You see, the reckless kid in an old clunker like that one is not a hot rodder at all. He's a square in a shot rod. Real hot rodders in organized clubs and timing associations all over the country have taken what used to be a hazard and turned it into a real hobby. And a genuine benefit to their communities. Not just through safe driving and driver education either. They've raised thousands of dollars for charity, conducted blood drives for the Red Cross, and developed top mechanics and designers for automobile manufacturers, as well as testing and proving ideas that have produced better, safer cars for everybody. So that's the real story of the cool hot rod. The one-time hazard that has become a brand new, safe, progressive American hobby.